So, I really love the movie Inside Out because I think that it really does a great job of being able to talk about all of the different things that we experience in our brains. And you and I both know that it's way easier to talk about somebody else's stuff or to put our stuff in understandable terms, right? So if we can put our emotions into 5 characters, and we can say to each other, anger is really taking control today, then we get to a point where we can start to talk about the stuff within us. We can start to talk about our fears and our anxieties and the things that make us really mad and the things that disgust us to the core. Gives us an opportunity to be able to talk about the things that keep us up at night, the things that we don't know how to rid our minds of, the things that carry the shame and the guilt, the things that weigh us down. And we live in a world where joy seems to be, or happiness seems to be the thing that everybody is chasing after. And if it doesn't bring you joy, you shouldn't do it. Now, many of you may have seen the Netflix special with Marie Kondo or read her book, The Joy of Tidying Up, where you look at items in your house and you wonder if it still brings you any joy. And if it no longer brings you joy, you're supposed to thank it for the joy it once brought you and donate it or throw it out. So the question then becomes, what sparks joy in you? As though the sole purpose of life is to follow the things that spark joy. Follow the things that make you feel good. And that works to a point. If you've ever come to me for counseling or life advice, you know that I tell you to follow your dreams, to do the work to be able to get to the point where you really feel like you're living out God's calling in your life. But it is not with a Pollyanna view as though the only time things are good in your life is if they spark joy. Or that if you follow Jesus, there will be no moments of sadness and fear and deep anxiety. Jacob in our passage today is wandering. He has fled from his brother from whom he stole Esau's birthright. He is fearful that his life is going to end. He is afraid of what will be and has absolutely no idea where he's headed next. He has no idea what life has for him, and he is afraid and worried and wondering where in the world God is, because it certainly does not feel like God is here and now. And then he has a dream. And his dream says probably the most important words from God for Jacob's life. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Think about the promises that God has been making to us since the very beginning of creation. That wherever we go, God will also be, that we will be God's people, and God will be our God. God has made the promise to us that so long as we believe in Jesus Christ, his Son, we will have eternal life. God has promised to uphold us and to keep us. God has promised to make us like angels. God has promised to be there for us, to lead us into the paths that lead to fullness of life. God has promised that before we even were, that we were knit together in our mother's womb, that life was breathed into us, that God knew the plans God had for us even before we knew our own name. God has written us in his heart that we belong to God. That we are not brought to condemnation, but that we are brought to fullness of life in the here and the now. And these promises God has been making to humanity since the very dawn of creation, and those promises remain true for us now. And therefore, Jacob's dream, what God says to him, also remains true for us. I will not leave you until I have completed what I have promised. The world is a mess, right? Every day you turn on the news and there's more and more and more stuff of how broken and messed up this world is. We can't even agree to wear masks to help protect each other without it sparking into a huge debate where we belittle one another. Every day you turn on the news and you hear something else about children being trafficked or people being murdered or just the ridiculous brokenness of the world. And you and I know, because we've lived, that our lives are not super joyful all the time. We know that there is darkness in our lives, darkness within us, dark, broken, scary places. It's not sunshine and happiness and joy all the time. But God says, I will not leave you until I have completed what I have promised. God will not leave us until all of the promises have been fulfilled. And then, that promise is that we'll be with God. The world, our lives, all got broken by this free will thing God gave us, right? I'm teaching a fast-track disciple class, so for anybody who's taken disciple, this is only 24 weeks instead of 36. It's just ever so slightly less intense. But we're talking about creation, right? The very first 2 chapters of Genesis. We're navigating through what it means that God had this tree in the center of the garden and then said to Adam and Eve, don't eat of that. And if you think about what it's named in English, it's the knowledge of it's the tree of the knowledge of good and of evil. And if you read the narrative, the snake, the devil, however you want to, I like the snake because snakes are gross. You think about that imagery, and the snake says to Eve, if you eat of this, you will become like God. That's why he doesn't want you to eat it. Because if you eat of that, you will have the same knowledge that God does. And Adam and Eve are very much like all of us, strong-willed, and I can do it by myself, and why wouldn't I want to know what God knows? And I imagine Eve is a little bit like I am, where if somebody tells you to do something, you're going to do the opposite of it. So the second somebody says, don't do this thing, I'm immediately going to do that thing. Even though I know it's probably for the best, still going to do it. So Adam and Eve eat of their own free will of this tree, the fruit of that tree, and all of a sudden, they know. They know the good and the bad of the world. They know that this gift that God has given to us, this free will thing, is going to ruin the whole of humanity. And it does. because what free will does is it allows us to choose our own self-interest. Free will means we get to make decisions for ourselves, which translates as I get to be my own boss. And when you are seeking to be your own boss and make your own way in the world, you're going to do what feels best for you. It's like when teenagers hit that point when they realize that they can do what they want. And the very first thing that most teenagers do is rebel in some way, right? They let go of what their parents have told them and do whatever they please as a way to establish their own independence, make their own mistakes, grow in their own wisdom. And while I don't have any teenagers of my own, I spent a lot of time working with preteens and teenagers, and I know that parents genuinely just want the best for their kids. And they understand that if their children would just listen to them and not hang out with those people and not do those things and not make those kinds of mistakes, then their lives would be so much better. But teenagers don't want to listen because they know better. They do better. They know what's best for themselves, despite the fact that they are 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and know very little outside of their own little bubble that they live in. It is the same for us, right? We think we know better. We think we know more. And so we want to do our own thing. And the second that the world rears its ugly head of being a sinful and broken place and our lives are not perfect, there's deep sadness and hurt. And we cry out, God, where were you? Where were you when I was at my lowest? Where were you now that I am experiencing the hardest parts of my life? Where are you when everything around me feels like it's burning to the ground and there is no hope for me? And the whisper of Genesis comes back to us. I will not leave you until I have completed what I have promised you. So much of our stories, when we really look back at our journey, the most profound moments we have with God are when we are at our lowest. And God breaks in and breathes new life, not to fix, not to remove, not to pretend like it didn't happen, but to sit. Sit with us in our stuff. I think one of the most beautiful traditions that come around this is Shiva in the Jewish tradition, of 7 days of sitting Shiva for your loved one after they have passed. And there's not a whole lot of anything in Shiva, right? You're not supposed to change your clothes. You're not supposed to talk. You're not supposed to do a whole lot of stuff when you're sitting Shiva. You're just supposed to sit and be with. That's exactly what I believe God does when we are in our most broken places. Is God sits Shiva with us. And it is so important that we sit in the stuff of life, because if we don't sit in the stuff, if we don't have our down moments, if we don't feel the fullness of the human experience, we miss on the depth of God's love for us. And so when we are sitting in the darkest parts of our life, God sits Shiva with us. God comes alongside of us and says, I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised to you. And when we come out, when we journey through, when we process through, when we find our lives again, what we have is a deeper appreciation for the vastness of life, and that God did not leave us when we were the most broken. So wherever you are in your life, whether you're in the deepest pits of despair, or you're on the other side, I invite you to think about all of the times when God did not leave you, even if you felt like God had. Right? Because sometimes we get so bogged down in our own darkness that we can't see the ways that God shows up for us, the way that the Spirit blows, the gifts that are given to us, even when we cannot recognize them. And I want you to start thinking about how God moves, about how God sits Shiva, about how God breathes life, about how your story is the next one that needs to be told. Because for someone else who's sitting in the hardest parts of their lives, they need you to tell them that God says to us, I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. God will not leave us, whether we're in the valleys or the mountains of our lives. No matter what happens, God does not leave us until promises have been fulfilled. And that is a fact. And that is what we hold on to. That even when the world feels like a dumpster fire and there is no hope or joy or belief that there will ever come a ray of sunshine again, God says, I'm with you today and every day.